Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman, and today we're going to discuss the myth of the Boy Scout rule. So, the myth of the Boy Scout rule, or the Boy Scout rule, I guess is not a myth, is leave it better than you found it. So,
Mm-hmm.
the idea is Boy Scouts go camping and they should leave the campground better than they found it. And this usually plays well into what we talk about, which is iterative this and iterative that. And hey, if you just start by cleaning up the coding area that you're working in before you do some work, or since you're there anyway, do some cleanup. That seems like it plays well with what we're saying. But Isaac, you encountered some problems. You ran headfirst into a buzzsaw of some kind.
Yeah, the Boy Scout rule, I guess it makes sense depending on the context in which you're working in the code base. If you're working in a very careful uh, context, like I usually am, like I'm going through and refactoring code, and that code is like for a client, and the client wants things to be basically as safe as possible because they don't want to lose any customers, and they're hiring you for a reason. It's probably because
Mm-hmm.
they can't scale, they have some other issues or things like that. Um, so yeah, the Boy Scout rule generally is like if you're in an area, tidy up the areas kind of around it. It
Mm-hmm.
does remind me a little bit of the Kent Beck tidy first thing, where like if you get in an area and you see a couple things, you can just tidy up little things here and there. Not huge chunks of logic, but just like change a comment to be more clear or a variable name to be more clear. And, like kind of gentle little things like this.
I do this all the time.
Hmm.
Uh,
So,
certainly, yeah. So, how did you run into trouble with this?
so running into trouble was, eh, let me start from the beginning. So
Okay.
they didn't have any observability in the system that we were using.
Okay.
So they're logging, like they didn't use CloudWatch logs. They basically had an EC2 instance running with logs being logged directly to a folder, and people would
Mm.
accidentally commit logs from their local because it wasn't get ignored. It was all kind of like ugly logs, and they weren't using things like Sentry for detecting exceptions being thrown and things like that. So the first thing we started doing was thinking, okay, well, we should start moving some of the stuff, getting some of the stuff in CloudWatch logs. Let's add Sentry, and let's just get a little bit of insight on how this is being used. In addition to like trying to understand the application to begin with, what does it do? What is the most used features? What problems does it solve? Just trying to paint a general context. That way we can
Mm-hmm.
act more safely in the code base. So we install Sentry. And what I like to do with Sentry to begin with is just turn the faucet all the way on. You can actually do like you can tinker with it to where only 0.1% of all the errors come through in case you're worried about like quota management and things like that for
Okay.
your how much you get billed monthly is based on that quota for all the things you submit to Sentry.
I thought Sentry was open source.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, good. I'm glad they're getting
Yeah.
paid. It's a good product.
It's a great product. But it gets expensive, and depending on how many events that you consume, that's what you get. How much you get charged for, more or less. So
Mm-hmm.
either way, what I like to do is just open floodgates to begin with, just to see like what the massive amount of errors is, and but to begin with, I mean just like for a few moments generally. So
Okay.
um, just to get kind of a glimpse of it, because if you do like a small amount of reporting subset, you might miss some of the other errors. So we turn them all on, and then we turn the faucet off.
Okay.
We take a look at all the errors, and people are really excited. The team's really excited because they see a lot of issues, some of which are very simple to fix. Some are obviously related to crons running and automations running.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so and then some of them are clearly because of like missing records. So like for example, one of the things that we saw was something related to an ACH cron.
Okay.
So it was like a verified deposit cron or something like that. I'm just inferring it from the URL that was submitted to Sentry because again we're kind of coming in with not very much knowledge.
Right. You're coming in
Um,
context free. You're just looking at an error in the log.
yeah, and one of the things said something like no such Stripe customer underscore blah 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 blah. Um, so that lends you to believe that yes, there's an issue with trying to find a record that's maybe in our database that's trying to match up with one that's in Stripe.
Right. Your config's wrong, or
The first thing I thought though is like, well, as an engineer, the first thing I thought was, oh, we should fix that. We know that there's a record that's not being found. How about we just delete that record? And
Mm.
the the second part of me was like, wait a minute. If that cron clearly has been failing on that same customer each time, how long has it been failing?
Hmm.
And what happens if it suddenly starts working again? If I do delete that record and it starts like turning, what if it starts sending like verified ACH emails to everybody from 7 years ago or something like that? I don't know, right?
Yes.
And so I was like, "Ooh, okay, I don't just fix it because my instinct is to fix it. Let's let it be."
No.
Now, I fortunately had that thought. Others did not. Other engineers, and maybe this is a good thing to consider too in the future. Other engineers were very excited. The engineers who had been there for a long time had seen a lot of correlation of like, oh, this we have a lot of problems in this area. This must be related to one of those problems in that area. And also because the errors came in recently, they
Hmm.
seemed new because we just started reporting them to Sentry. Although we don't know how long they've been there. They could have been there for 7 years. So either way,
Hmm.
I let it sit there. We turn the faucet back on. We let the quota come in. Like actually, what we end up doing is we find some of the ones that are reporting like tens of thousands of errors. We
Hmm.
fix some of those that are like not the customer one, but some ones that are like usually there's
Noisy,
stuff
but
like
mostly irrelevant.
deprecations. Yeah, exactly. That way we can actually turn the faucet all the way on and just have it not throw away some extra ones. So we do that and we leave it running, and then people are kind of excited. Then we find a bunch of ones to put into the sprint next week. Like maybe this is related to issues people have had with invoicing or with this or with
Hmm.
that. So it's been really useful. But then there ends up being some kind of emergency happening related to automations. Generally, almost always automations, no matter where you go. There's an emergency.
It's
And I
always
forget.
background processing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So, and I forget the original context of the emergency, but I think what had happened was people were not getting their emails, and it
Hmm.
looked like some jobs got stalled, and we had to kickstart them again. And by kickstart, there's clearly like some record that was goofed, and so they ended up just like deleting that record, something similar to the customer thing, really, and letting the rest of the workers begin. So an exception was being thrown in their system that threw every now and then, and it was just normal, and someone would just go in and fix the exception, and things would start working again. Now,
Manually
if you're
fixing
maintaining
poisoned
it,
queues. Ugh.
yeah, if you're maintaining it and somebody in your team is just manually going in and fixing it when it breaks, sure, things are up to date. But this time around, they were a little perplexed because it happened back to back, and they're like, "Why is this exception keep getting thrown? Why do my workers keep getting stalled? Maybe there's something in Sentry that can help me." And so they look at the newly reported errors in Sentry and find one they think, "Oh, this looks kind of related to the error to the area," and they fix it. They put an MR up and they fix the exception being thrown in Sentry. Now,
They
how this
fixed the bug. Was there a red stapler? Did they put fix the red stapler?
I don't know the red stapler reference.
Oh, Office Space.
Ah,
The
yeah,
guy, one of the guys, was laid off years ago, but due to a bug, he never got told, and
excellent.
so rather than be confrontational about it, they fixed the bug. So the system finally laid him off,
I
but
have
he still
to.
never was told.
I have to get around to watching this movie. It's a
You've
classic, I
never seen
know, but
Office
I've
Space?
never seen it. No, I haven't
Oh,
seen a lot of movies.
it holds up.
Okay, good. I'll put it on my list. Uh, Either way,
Anyway, they fixed the bug.
they fixed the bug, and how this exactly unfolded, I don't know. We just fixed it and did a post mortem, kind of like a loose post mortem, digging into it. Or their team did because
Hmm.
I was still coming in and learning the system, and we were still pretty new.
Hmm.
But it sounds like what had happened was they fixed one of those issues I had mentioned related to like the customer ID, where something had been broken for years,
Hmm.
and because that was fixed, another queue started processing, and there was a series of automations with triggers and conditions that existed separately that triggered when some other conditions were met, and now those conditions were being met that suddenly had not been met in 7 years. So there's a huge queue of things to go through. And then email started working again, but customers started getting like hundreds of emails. We just started spamming them. the exact series of automations and things that have happened that caused this to happen,
Hmm.
still unclear. But we do know it was because they fixed this one thing and this queue actually finally got to process all the way through. And it was
This is
similar
a
again.
poisoned queue problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So
This is
this
why,
is
yeah, you need, just for the listener, uh,
mhm,
all of your queues need something called the dead letter queue, where if
right.
something fails to process n number of times, it gets moved off the queue and onto your dead letter queue to keep your queue from getting poisoned and stuck and then having this explosion when you finally unstick it.
Right. And I've actually seen, I mean, queues, man, almost every time I've seen an implementation of a queue, I've seen a disaster somewhere where either people didn't think of the poison queue, or there was like one time we saw a timeout issue where something couldn't be processed within a certain time frame, but
Hmm.
actually an async process still was kicked off with that queue job, so it was still working, but the timeout, because it was thrown, it didn't remove the item from the queue, so it was picked up from the queue again, and it
Hmm.
just kept firing a bunch of async processes. I've seen just like you have to be really careful with queue management. But dead letter queues absolutely are an essential. If it fails, move it off the queue, because reprocessing it, I've seen double billing, like charges, just like charges in a loop with credit cards. A lot of angry customers, but not in this case.
Yeah,
But I
queues
have
are
seen it
hard.
before. Yeah,
Don't
queues are
roll
hard.
your own.
Right. So either way, suddenly it became known when customers reported, "Hey, I'm getting hundreds of emails. What's going on here?" And to they had to mitigate it by turning off all the workers to begin with, to try to dig through and figure out what the issue was. But when they finally got to the root cause, they realized, oh well, there was a separate thing we were trying to fix, and while we were trying to fix that thing, we fixed a sentry error we thought was related, which caused this other queue to continue working again. And again, all the way back to the original concept of me thinking, oh, I should not fix this broken exception for the ACH verified whatever it was, because you really don't know what's gonna like what happens when the thing that has been broken for the longest time starts working again is the main thing.
Right.
So Boy
Really,
Scout
this is
rule,
your fault for not marking in Sentry, do not fix possible side effects.
sure,
You're
yeah, I
trying
guess
to
it could
blame
all my
other
fault.
people and the Boy Scout rule, but really, this is your fault because you saw the
No,
danger and you didn't alert other people.
I actually did alert other people. I called out "Do not fix this record" for that particular thing, but I just didn't call it out for each one. But regardless, I think it
Yeah.
still holds true. And recently, in the same context, I saw people going through and trying to clean up some other areas. Um, there's things in Sentry that was like trying to access offset of null or something like array offset. They were trying to hit a key that didn't exist on a variable that was an array.
Hmm.
Um, and some people were going through and fixing certain things, doing the is null checks. But if you looked at how they fixed it, like the check was slightly not the same, or the value was like
Mm.
a null instead of an empty string, and I started getting kind of really careful about it. Like, don't clean up these areas over here. I know it looks tantalizing to go through and like fix a couple of Sentry errors here and there, but unless you can write a test to assert that what you changed is
Hmm.
exactly the same, like you didn't change behavior. One person was going to pass down, oh, this should be a string, but actually all the functions below it expected a null, and I'm like, well, don't touch it then. We're not trying to get into a rabbit hole of refactoring here. Touch just what you need. So then I got really, when I call it the myth of the Boy Scout rule, yes, you should still follow the Boy Scout rule, but be very considerate too of downstream impact of making what are seemingly innocent changes. And that's my general rule of thumb now. Is like, if you see a bunch of stuff above where you're changing and you're
Hmm.
wanting to tidy it up, if you're in a really old code base and you don't know the downstream impacts, don't risk it. There's no point in risking it.
Yeah, side effects are brutal in old and tightly coupled code.
Right.
And I think you called it out there where if you couldn't write a test and you couldn't be sure that it was exactly the same, because the worst thing you could do, right, because the Boy Scouts have an agreed upon definition of better, right? Like,
Right.
right, if a Boy Scout goes to a campsite, no matter what chapter these Boy Scouts are from, they've been taught, essentially the same thing about what better and would be. But if you're developers in a code base, you probably don't have a shared understanding of better. And
Right.
so then it becomes very opinionated. Maybe one troop thinks that you should clean up all the garbage, and the other troop thinks that maybe you should stack all the flammables.
I like when we go into metaphors.
Yes, metaphors. Super metaphors.
Well, in general, though, I mean, like Boy Scout rules are fine if you've
Yeah.
got great test coverage. If you're working in really old code that has zero test coverage, like we were, there's
Mhm.
no point in introducing extra lines of code that could, end up screwing you later. Just change what you need to. Be careful about it. QA it if you need to. If there's no other way to test it, QA it. If you
Mhm.
can test it, write a test for it. But just less lines you change, the better. And don't go and touch things that you don't know what they do.
I'm going to disagree with you slightly though, because it's don't do a general cleanup if you're trying to change something else. But it's still a great idea to go in intentionally to do a cleanup and just do a cleanup. It's when you're
Oh yeah,
mixing the
I'm not
two
arguing that.
things,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like you come into an area that's got no test coverage and it's terrible. If your goal is to make it more testy, improve test coverage and fix things, great. Otherwise, don't do it.
Right. Yeah. So sure, for clarity, we can say like essentially, if your goal is to refactor, that's fine. If your goal is to uh, change one area of code, and you go, well, while I'm here, that thing looks weird, and that's where things get a little scary, and you should just kind of let it
Yes,
be. Yeah.
yes. For a great follow-on episode, one of our failure Fridays, I was Boy Scouting and fixed a
Mm.
function about time, and I changed time in seconds was reporting milliseconds or the other way around. I don't remember anymore. And I fixed it because it was wrong, and then I wrote a test to prove that I had fixed it. This
Those
is
are the
back in the
best, man.
archives. Yeah, it was a
Wait
good
a minute,
one.
my test is failing. The test must be wrong. You change your test
Yeah.
with the functionality and introduce the bug.
Right, I changed the functionality and wrote a test to prove that the new functionality. It was
Yeah.
good. It was perfect. That was expensive.
All
So,
right.
yes. All right. Thank you all for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.